What's going on YouTube? Back with another video. This one's gonna be over Blood Meridian. It's a book review. Um, this is a really great book. I really enjoyed it. It's very violent. This is probably the most violent book I've ever read. It's fairly quick too. The only thing that'll slow you down, or at least what it slowed me down, is there's some more esoteric words. The author uses words like that are outdated for certain types of guns, like fusel. I had never heard of that. It basically just means like a light musket. Then he also uses like Spanish words, which I knew some of the Hispanic, some Spanish. I know some Spanish, so that was kind of helpful in reading some of the dialogue, because some of the dialogue is in Spanish. It's like, I would say most of it is in fairly simple Spanish. So if you know a little bit, you'll be able to fairly well make out what they're saying. But there may be a couple of scenes where you need to look up what they're saying. Like there's one that's like talking about these Spanish like fortune tellers that are using tarot cards, and it's like he says like una carta at one point. It just means like one card, like pick a card, basically. But anyways, that's just a brief introduction to the book. I think it was really good. Again, very, very violent. It's so violent that they have decided not to make this into a movie. They've said they can't make it into a movie, which is, it's pretty surprising to me that they say that, because movies like Kill Bill and stuff are out there. But I can see where they're coming from. I think it could be done. Personally, I think it could be done, but I suppose they may have to cut back on some of the gore. Because, okay, the book is Blood Meridian, which meridian means like an invisible line that goes, I think it's an invisible line of longitude that goes around the earth, right? So the name of the book is basically saying like they're going along a continuous line of blood and like tarnish, which it's pretty cool. And really there is violence throughout the entire book. Throughout the whole book, while you're reading it, there's some kind of violence, I would say. Even at the very beginning, the introduction to the book, the main character is the kid, and it talks about how he's always getting into fights, and he gets knocked out by like one of the main characters that you're first introduced to, his Todavine. It's one of the first. Again, I don't know if I'm saying that his name right, Todavine. That's how I imagined it would sound, but that is how I pronounced it. But anyways, that's the first main character that he comes across, and he basically almost gets killed by him because he won't like step out of his way, so they get into a fight, and he wakes up like just laying on the ground as he got knocked out. But it's very dark, so it's a lot like I just read a book by William Faulkner. It's Light in August. I would say it's actually, I read on the cover of the book, it compares Cormac McCarthy to William Faulkner and to Herman Melville, which I think are both very fair comparisons. Maybe I would say it doesn't compare as much to not William Faulkner, but it doesn't compare as much to Herman Melville, just as far as maybe the quality of the writing and the story that's told. You could compare it to like Herman Melville's Moby Dick, but as far as the writing style and like the content of the book, I definitely would say it's more comparable to how William Faulkner writes. I will say though, when I was reading Light in August by William Faulkner, I feel the vocabulary is definitely more accessible than some of the vocab in Blood Meridian. That said, I think it's definitely worth it to read this, regardless of the vocabulary. I really think most of the vocabulary that's kind of like esoteric and difficult to access is just, again, esoteric. It's like from the period of time like it's being written about. It's like there's a lot of words that are more native to like not Spain but South America, because a lot of their travels are through Mexico, and so it's kind of has some of those words in there, and a lot of the words that he uses are just kind of things like guns or obscure types of alcohol. Like there's mezcal, which I knew generally what that was, but I kind of had to look it up to see. And then there's another like type of alcohol that he describes in here, and there's like fusel, and then there's caballado, which just means like a herd of horses. I had never heard of that before. But just a few words like that. But let's actually get to the meat of the book. So we'll talk a little bit more about his writing style and stuff actually first. So the main character is the kid. The kid literally does not have a name throughout the entire book. I got like, I don't know, maybe around 40, 50 pages in, and I was like, okay, so is the main character literally just the kid? Does he actually have a name in the book? And I had to look it up to confirm it, and like, yeah, he doesn't have a name. It's just a kid throughout the entirety of the book, which is really interesting. I think Cormac McCarthy he takes some liberties with his writing style that are very interesting. There's a few words that he uses in his book that are like they could have been hyphenated, that are just like combined into one word, which is interesting. And then there's some words that are like, I think this is why it's also kind of, his work is kind of comparable to William Faulkner, because he does this a lot too in Light in August. He'll just kind of like combine two words together and like make a new word, which I really enjoy that, because it shows like the depth the writer can add just by, through vocabulary, creating words or combining words or whatever. But again, as far as his writing style, something that was really interesting to me, I say really interesting, it was just different than I had seen in any other book. There's no quotation marks throughout the entire book. So a lot of times there's definitely dialogue tags, so you can tell who's speaking without the need for quotation marks. Although they are like offset by new paragraphs and everything like that. But it's interesting that there's no quotation marks. This is the first book I've ever read that has had absolutely no quotation marks, and I think it's a cool stylistic choice for Cormac McCarthy, because there's no quotation marks. It's kind of similar to the way that some authors will just have the speaker continue without having to add more dialogue tags, because you can just kind of tell by the context who's speaking. So I think that's an interesting addition as well. So throughout the book, the main character, the kid, at first, like, he's just getting into fights, and then he runs into Totavine, who basically whoops his ass, and then he follows him, and like they basically set this dude's like hotel on fire. I don't know, maybe he was like doing something to them, like they like set his door on fire and run out of there, which is crazy. And then the kid kind of just travels along for a little while, and then he eventually runs into some like troops who are like, basically they just convince him to join the army, like I say the army too. They're more like, it's like they kind of talk about it in the book. They're more like mercenaries rather than the army, because they're just gonna go to Mexico and like kill like Indians and like some. I think they kill some of the Mexicans over there too. But they're just like, we're gonna cross it over to Mexico and kill like Indians and Mexicans and like scalp them and get all this money for it. And they're like, it's kind of, mercenaries is probably the best way to describe it. But there's all these people like warning, well, not all these people, but there's one guy that they come across in a bar before they cross the desert over to Mexico, and he's basically like, you guys are gonna die crossing over there. And quite a few of them die crossing the desert, because they get sick and they just die, and then there's no water out there. There's actually a word in the book, I can't remember what it is, but it's like it's one of those esoteric words, but it's just like a long stretch of desert without water. So you'll run into quite a few of those like words in this book, but I think it does add like some depth to the book. I saw something like the author spent like several years reading just for this, like, to create this book. Just like related topics and stuff like that. And you can really tell because when I was researching for like writing my own book, they talk about you kind of add more depth to the book through the research you've done, but you don't just like, it's not just like an essay, like an expository essay explaining what you've learned in your research, but you can definitely see where what he's learned is kind of woven into the book. Cool. So we'll continue on down. So I put that it's like a Lord of the Ring journey style. So there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of violence. So a good portion of the time they're like fighting and killing people and scalping Indians and doing all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But a good portion of the book is like the journey. So it kind of discusses like the landscape. And I think Cormac McCarthy, like I wrote like a little while at one point in the book I wrote down there's a really nice juxtaposition between like there's a word he uses in the book which is lurid. I actually really like that word, which basically means like explicit violence or like sexual scenes. It's just like explicit like writing. It's like really explicit imagery is maybe a good way to put it, but that kind of like juxtaposes like the beautiful like descriptions of the scenes and like additionally the depth of the characters. But I underlined one line that I really liked in the book that kind of highlights the descriptiveness in the book. And this is only one example, like pretty early on in the book, but I really liked how he described like the sky, or like the dusk, like the setting sun. So he said, by 1,000 fires in the iron blue dusk, he keeps his commissary, and he's a wry and grinning tradesman, good to follow every campaign or houndman from their holes in just those whited regions where they've gone to hide from God. So that was really interesting. Reading this kind of brings up another point. There's a lot of references to God and like the biblical, and I wouldn't say it's as much as William Faulkner. When you're reading like Light in August by William Faulkner, it's filled with like references to the Bible and talking about God, and there's a lot of biblical and church like related terms and references in Light in August. But it's kind of like a background in this book. It kind of adds more depth to the character. And I would say violence is more of like the theme of the book rather than God and the church. But it's definitely in the background. And there's one point in the book where the judge, who becomes like, I guess you would say he's the antagonist of the book. Okay, and we're probably going to get to a part where I'm going to start like giving away stuff. So if you haven't read the book, maybe go back and read it and finish the video if you want to do that. Obviously, you do not have to. But anyways, there's a point in the book where he basically like, I think he says like war is God or something like that. Something along those lines. But it's like towards the end of the book, it kind of reveals like the judge's nature. It's like you're reading through it and like he starts to do some kind of like questionable stuff. Like we're kind of like hinting towards the end of the story, but let me talk a little before we'll come back to the judge, but we'll talk a little bit more about the book. So they're just like they travel through all these lands and like they kill so a good portion of the book is them hunting like Indians or being chased by Indians, and they like scalp all these like Indians and bring them to, I think Chihuahua is like the city that they're bringing them to, and they're just like hailed as like heroes for like killing all these Indians, and granted these Indians, like I think they're Apaches for the most part, they like hunt and like brutally kill like a lot of the Hispanic people in the book, and like obviously the people hunting them, so they're not all good, and looking back, obviously the killing of Native Americans was terrible, but anyways, they're like hailed as like heroes, and they're like people are just giving them all these gifts, and a lot of times they're just like getting drunk and revelrous parties and all this stuff after, and they have all this money after they've killed all these Indians and scalped their heads. I'm not sure quite how it works for the scalping. I'm not sure if they just show them and they're like, here's the war trophies, we killed this many Indians, then give me this amount of money or what. But I remember they just giving them like an insane amount of money, just like and food, just kind of like running out their stock for doing this for them. And when they come to the city after the first big stretch through the desert, after they've I think at one point they're kind of like they're taken to the city as prisoners in Chihuahua, and that's when they meet the judge and they get out and then they go hunt at the Indians, and then they come back and then they get all the prizes and rewards or whatever. And after that, they continue on, uh, just hunting again for Indians, just continuing as they were doing. And at this point, they come across like this like river, and there's like a ferry. And there's like a doctor that's in the book, and he's basically he came into control of the ferry, and he charges people to go across it. I can't remember quite what he was like where he was going beforehand, but at this point they kind of just stop like on their journey, and they're going to they just like take over the ferry and they start charging people like basically whatever they want, and they just amass this amount like massive amount of money, and I think some of the Native Americans like they build their own like ferry. At one point, they go and kill them, and they're like basically they want to keep control of the ferry, and that's kind of what that's like what sparks towards the end of the book is like the Apaches and Native Americans get mad and they come back and they're like killing all the people there. But towards the end of the book is kind of where it starts to get kind of questionable, because at one point in one of the cities, like the judge, like there's a couple questionable things he does, and like it's kind of interesting how like Cormac McCarthy sets up his character, because throughout the book you're like, okay, the judge is cool. He's like he's very religious, very pious Christian, and he's also very intelligent. He's supposed to know like several languages. He knows like Dutch, he knows Spanish, he knows English, obviously, and then maybe some other stuff. And he'll draw in like this book, and at one point he's just saying he's trying to like just put all of his memories down on a page so that he doesn't like they're not like filling his mind or whatever. And so he'll like take down sketches of like cave drawings and write about his travels and all this stuff. And he seems like a pretty you think the author kind of leads you to believe that he's like a good guy. He's like just all along for the war. And I guess that's kind of questionable. What leads you to question it is like, first, like, one part he throws like so he buys these dogs, like these two puppies from this like little Hispanic kid that's like selling puppies to people, and then he just throws them into like a raging river. I can't remember if it was a waterfall or a river. Just chucks them in, and like the kid's like just sitting there with the coin, like just watching him, like like what is this guy doing? And I was kind of trying to figure out why that happened. Like, well, that wouldn't like why would he do that? And I don't know. I kind of just wrote down maybe it's just like advancing the plot, showing the characters not all good, because maybe they're like a little messed up from the war or whatever, from killing all these people and just with no remorse. But that's kind of where I started to question like the judge, like what's going on with this character. But it continues on, and you see like this portion like towards the end they're basically running from like the Indians, trying not to get killed. And that's where it kind of takes a turn, and the judge is like basically like hunting the main character, it seems like. And the ex-priest is another character. He's just telling like the kid just like kill him, like just kill him, kill the horses so that they die in like the desert or whatever. And it's kind of odd because he doesn't like. I figured, actually almost spoil. I did like a little bit spoil it for myself, like right towards the end, because I looked up. I'm like, why is the judge like basically chasing the main character and the ex-priest towards the end of the book? And it kind of revealed that like he kills him at the very end. So that's what happens at the end, is the judge like kills the kid. It's written a little weird too, because like it still had me like, if I didn't already know that, if I hadn't read that beforehand, I don't know if I would know that like he actually killed him, because it says like there are like these portions where like the judge kind of like tells his background. There's like a big revelation of like his travels and stuff like that at one point where he's just like telling a story to the reader. I think that's a really good way to like get backstory, and like the writers do is they'll have the character tell a story to the other characters, and that's he kind of does that again towards the end, and it's kind of like revealing his thoughts on like the mercenary work that they're doing, and this is once like they're hunting, I think, or no, this is, let me see. Yeah, I think this is right. Yeah, this is still when they're being chased. But he says this is kind of like revealing of why the judge ended up killing the main character in the end. He said, "You alone were mutinous. You alone reserved in your soul some corner of clemency for the heathen," which means like mercy or lenience. That's what clemency means. And so that's what his problem is with like the kid. Like he's basically saying you were merciful or you have like regret in killing the Indians, and now he's like, all right, that's why I'm hunting you and I'm gonna kill you. And like he doesn't kill. It's kind of surprising that the judge just doesn't kill him like right there when they're running from the Indians, because he figured you would. The kid had several, like at least two opportunities to just shoot him, but he doesn't. And towards the end of the book, he's like traveling along again, and he meets the judge in like a bar, and there's like a bear dancing, which is kind of weird. But and then the bear gets shot, and then like the judge just goes on this long tangent about like basically philosophical, like men, they don't really have a reason to do things, like they're just doing stuff, you know what I mean? And then there's one line towards like right before he's about to like just like kill the kid while he's like going upstairs and stuff. He says, "There's a room on the stage for one beast and one alone. All others are destined for a night that is eternal and without name. One by one they will step down into the darkness before the footlamps. Bears that dance, bears that don't." But yeah, it's really ominous, and like it's kind of interesting. You're reading through this, you're like, okay, what is going on here? Because the kid's like just saying, "I wasn't seeking you out. I was just coming to the bar just to hang out or whatever," and the judge happened to be there. And the judge is like, "Nah, you're here with me." You know what I'm saying? And he's like, "You're meant to be here," type thing. Like it's predetermined almost. And towards the end, like I think he just goes up to like the kid just goes up to his room, and he finds the judge just sitting there naked, and he just shoots him. Which it's really a crazy ending, and it's kind of interesting too, because like I said, throughout the book, you're thinking like this is a good character. He's not like evil or anything, and then towards the end, it just completely throws you. Because you see kind of like a couple of those instances of like the judge's evil kind of poking you through. Like there's one point where there's this like Indian kid with them, and he's like playing with them 1 minute, and then they walk off, and they come back, and he's like smashed him into the ground and scalped the kid or something. And he's basically like, "Shoot me or put your gun away," which is pretty crazy. But here, let's see what else. So like I said, yeah, lots of descriptive language from like just esoteric stuff, and there's a lot of like, again, a lot of juxtaposition between like the beautiful writing of like the scenery and stuff, and then the violence throughout the book. But he does a lot of similes, which are nice. It adds a little bit of depth to it. And yeah, you just tell like the main character, he's just crazed. It's just not the main character, but the judge is just really crazed, and it's weird too, because there's another character, Galanton, who's like really close to him throughout the book, the judge, and like they kind of go along together, and he ends up dying, but it kind of like makes you question, did he know that like the judge was crazy the whole time and just thought like war is basically God, and like you shouldn't question having to kill, you shouldn't have any mercy. He goes on a big tangent about like how war is like the greatest thing. Basically, it's like like, there's an analogy to like gambling where like you gamble like everything you have, like your life or whatever, and then it's like basically just saying it's like the greatest pursuit of man and like all this stuff, comparing like God to war, and it's just really revealing of like the judge's nature. But let's see what else. Here I actually found it. It says, as war becomes dishonored, its nobility called into question, and those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will dance become a false dance, and the dancers false dancers. So he just has this like big like expatiation upon war and like, you know, why the kid is wrong and like why he's there. Basically, I think he's just saying it's like his destiny to die because he's not unmerciful in his killing of the Indians. And it's kind of weird too, because like you maybe will see that a little bit. Maybe he just maybe the inside the like the mind of the judge, he just thinks that, but you don't really see any mercy from the kid, I would say, because he kills like quite a few amount of people in the book. So it's really odd ending, but overall it's really great. I really enjoyed it. It's very, very violent and bloody, and it's really great. It's one of those you can read really quickly. I kind of slowed down on the first part, and I could have read the last portion a little bit quicker, I'm sure. But I do like to slow down and underline the words that I don't know. There's still quite a few in here that I'm going to go back and double check on. That said, I'm like most of the words in the book, you could just, you know, pretty much understand what it is just from context clues. But I do like to go back through and make sure, you know, I'm getting the most out of the book that I possibly can. Like haggard. Haggard just means like worn or gaunt or exhausted, you know what I'm saying? Like stuff like that. You could probably figure out what that means, but sometimes it's good to, you know, slow down a little bit anyways, because it gives you a little bit more time to like absorb the book and think about it. Cool. I'm trying to think about what else. So yeah, in the end, the judge just kills the kid, which is it's really odd. It's kind of an odd ending because, you know, they're traveling with each other the whole time. You know, this group of mercenaries, and they've got all this money and all this, you know, stuff. And towards the end, like before the kid goes off on his adventure, he's actually put in jail for like the crimes of like causing all this destruction, and then he's released. And Todavine and Brown are like caught, I think, in the desert, and then they're both hanged for that crime. I think they ended up taking the fall or whatever. But it's really interesting. If you like westerns and you like, you know, even if you don't like westerns, if you can kind of get into that mindset, it's really interesting just because of how much gore and like violence there is. If you're into stuff like that, well, it's really violent and kind of like there's basically fighting, like there's conflict throughout the whole book, which is why I think it keeps you captivated. And also the writing is really, really good. It's really great. I think it might be beneficial if you kind of slow down and, you know, look up the stuff you don't know. Even like a lot of the words, it's not necessarily like, you know, you wouldn't necessarily need to look up every single word if you didn't want to, because you can kind of tell from context clues. And a lot of the words which you won't know maybe just be like alcohol or I don't know, just like stuff like that, you know, individual things. Like there's some that like, there's one that describes like a certain type of stirrup, you know, it's like stuff like that you wouldn't necessarily need to slow down and look up. Or like, here's one, pinole, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right. but it's just basically like a type of like food. It's roasted ground maize, which is corn. So it's like roasted corn. And that's like a food that they eat throughout the book. And, tiny words like that. But it kind of, the individual vocabulary, it kind of tells a lot about the author. And I think it adds more to the book. So if you like, it's kind of fun to kind of slow down a little bit. But it definitely adds time to the reading. So if you kind of just want to read it straight through, you can absolutely do that. And, I've read books about reading that basically tell you just to read it straight through. So, but let me talk a little bit about Cormac McCarthy, and then we'll wrap it up with that. So he's considered by many to be the greatest American author of our time. So that's kind of what drew me to him. I heard he passed away, and I know he did No Country for Old Men, which is it's a very well-renowned movie. And I've heard, just around online after his death, unfortunately, that he's just, his book and his works are really great, and they're really well respected in the intellectual community. So I decided to, I have a bunch of other books, clearly, that I haven't read quite yet, but I went ahead and decided to pick it up because I thought it would be good, and it was. And I really wanted to read some of his works and see what I thought for myself. And I didn't disappoint. I really would recommend it. I think it's interesting that he really doesn't have too many books out there, even though he's a fairly well-renowned author. I think that kind of sheds a light on what the difference is between some people will read books slower but get more out of it. Some people will write more books, and some people write slower but really focus on the quality of the books. So just because an author doesn't have a fecundity, a great amount of works written, I don't know, then it doesn't necessarily mean anything about the author, because this is a phenomenal book, and I think he only has maybe, I think definitely under 10 books. I think maybe 4 or 5. I know, here you go. It says, Child of God, The Counselor, The Orchard Keeper, Outer Dark, The Stonemason, The Sunset Limited, Sutri. This might actually just be other books from Vintage International, but I know for sure he has The Passenger, The Road, No Country for Old Men, and then maybe a couple others. But I guess he won the Pulitzer Prize for The Road too. So if you don't want to start with this one, I don't know. Yeah, it's All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and The Cities of the Plain are by him as well. But yeah, I don't necessarily know if this is the best one to start with, but I really liked it. And I think with authors and with reading, you can start wherever you want, unless it's a series. So it was really, really good. I really enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm not going to rate it. I don't really ever rate books. If I ever read a bad book, I might be I didn't necessarily like this, but I haven't really read a book that I was this is just garbage, I think there have been a couple of books when I was younger that I only read parts of, but I mean, those are young adult literature, and it's not really comparable to things like this, in my opinion, but it was really good. I guess the kid is 14 years old. I didn't really ever suspect that he was that young, but especially considering what he was doing in the book. But I thought it was phenomenal. I think you guys should check it out. Let me know what you think. If you've read any other Cormac McCarthy works, then let me know, and maybe I'll check those out. I really enjoyed it. I definitely will read more of his. And I think he lives up to the hype of being compared to people like William Faulkner and Herman Melville. Based off what I've just this book, I think was a really great author, and sadly he passed away. But that's the great thing about literature. It's people pass away, but literature is in a way kind of continues on past death, and people can still read that and appreciate the time and effort that these people put into these books. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. I really like this. I'll definitely do some more book reviews. I really love reading. I might do a review of In Light of August by William Faulkner. I really like that as well, and I just recently read that. But yeah, that's it. Appreciate you all watching. Definitely check out Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy.